history throughout my life has been framed in which I was always on the outside and never saw myself in history. That's why I started all these paintings to begin with, because I didn't see them in places like this. Then I found out from students that it was actually removed.
Where are they at the moment?
I'm heading to Vancouver Island to meet up with oil painter Chrystal Phan. We're starting work on a new piece that will be part of a group exhibition. Chrystal's work has been featured in private collections and institutions like the Royal BC Museum and the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria.
We're here at Nymph Falls on Vancouver Island. We just did a photo shoot. I'm here with Chrystal Phan, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about a project that we've got coming up.
So I came to the Comox Valley Art Gallery with a proposal for a project that I'm calling No Burden, because I haven't been in the art world for very long. And I'm 41 years old. I started doing art at like 37. And so the rest of my life and professional career, I've been working outside of the arts. And what I noticed in going into the arts was that race was really important. It's almost centered, right? Race, identity, all of those things, which was never a thing for me before. You were just like, the contents of your character, like that's what was important, but no, not in the arts. So I was like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this. Like, it's a little bit of a burden, right? Where you have to perform, like, I'm like, okay, I gotta do my ching chong bing bong dance, like, right, to get jobs. And so I thought, what would it look like if I didn't have to do that? What would my art look like? Or is the fact that I'm racialized and I have these specific experiences, is that what creates the art? Is that what drives the art? Is that really not a burden, but actually a huge advantage? So I found another artist who felt the same way. I'm like, let's just do this together. So I thought this idea of like, what if we make art together where we don't have the burden of being racialized and we can meet each other first as artists, where your culture and identity, it's the context, but it's not the story.
So what's your vision for this photo shoot?
I'm not connected to the earth whatsoever. Like, I don't want it touching me. Like, I would never be barefoot, like in a park. There's no way. And so I wanted to think about how would I be in nature? And so we did this photo shoot. But what I wanted to do is have you and me interacting with nature through something that we're familiar with, which is like karaoke, which is very like a natural activity. So it's like, that's natural to me. That's like the earth connection. So it's like, why don't we just do karaoke on the rocks?
I visited Chrystal's studio to explore her artistic process and to dive into her experiences growing up in Canada as part of a Vietnamese refugee family.
Being born here and having Vietnamese refugee parents who didn't really want to be Vietnamese anymore. We were raised really Canadian, but like the version of Canadian that Vietnamese refugees provide, right? So it's like kind of made up. You just like figure it out along the way. It's like this mishmash of cultures. So I felt really lost in this very kind of traditional space where there were like hundreds of Vietnamese people who I didn't know. Couldn't speak to them. I felt really lost. And then I also kind of had to kind of fake my way through kind of the rituals of offering incense to the deceased altar, like things that I kind of knew how to fake, but I didn't know, and I couldn't really relate to anybody. Well, The Lucky Ones is a series of paintings and a couple installations that follow my experience of being at a Vietnamese funeral for the first time. So that confusion, the feelings of confusion inspired me, like pretty much at that funeral, I was inspired to make some art about all of those confused intergenerational challenges. One of the responses I got from someone who was like me in that they're a second generation Vietnamese Canadian, it really touched them and triggered something in them around kind of history, family history and memory, because they don't know where their parents came from or their stories. And a lot of what The Lucky Ones is about is kind of our inability across generations as immigrants of refugees having, kind of traumatizing experiences and being unable or unwilling to express those challenges to their children. And then in turn, we learn or don't learn how to express ourselves. And so there's just this awkwardness where we don't talk about anything ever. And so that kind of resonated with him, in that he's like, oh, I'm 40 plus years old and I have no clue where my parents came from.
The Royal BC Museum's Old Town exhibit was closed on January 2nd, 2022, as part of an effort to decolonize the third floor gallery and to bring in more diverse perspectives on the province's history. When Old Town reopened in July 2023, Chrystal's painting, My Still Life, was one of 2 new additions to the gallery. We're heading to Victoria to see her work in person.
Years ago, I used to work as a fundraiser, and I worked at the Royal BC Museum, where, only for 2 years, but I experienced like a butt ton of racism and exclusion. I was seeing that in the exhibits and in the collection. I didn't see at least my community represented. We're like the 5th largest minority in BC. And so I thought, well, you know what, I can do something about that. And I just started making art about my personal experiences. And I wanted them to be very natural and show how we're Canadian too. I was lucky enough to have a few big champions of my work, and one, the art curator India Young, who was integral in acquiring 2 of my pieces, and one of them was on display in Old Town, and it was amazing because people would reach out to me, families with kids who were like, wow, I can't believe it, like I can see myself represented in here. I would never thought I would. And students were writing about it. And then I found out from students that it was actually removed, which was sad. But then they were upset about it because, finally they were seeing themselves as Canadians in a Canadian institution, and now it's no longer there.
Where are they at the moment?
They are currently in the archives vault.
We visited the Royal BC Museum's archive in search of Chrystal's work. We were joined by India Young, curator of art and images, who guided us through the collection. She shares why she advocated for the museum to acquire 2 of Chrystal's pieces.
I am extremely excited today to chat with Chrystal about her artwork, Pool Party. This is one of 2 artworks that has recently been acquired by the museum, and is such an important inclusion in us beginning to build our collection to represent the diversity of stories that are part of British Columbia. The museum rarely acquires new artworks, and it is the first purchase of a contemporary artwork that we have done in the last 30 years, so we're extremely excited for it to be here. It brings genre painting into the Canadian sphere. We're telling very specifically Canadian stories and the people that are in them, and that is what I really love about Chrystal's work. Any person can place themselves in this scene and have a summer memory. I love how these flowers, you just see them all over British Columbia. They're in people's yards. It just feels like a place that we all inhabit. And that's one of the things that I love about the painting. The more ways that we can put Chrystal's work in conversation with our collections and with exhibitions invites audiences, the larger Canadian public, to also sort of reframe assumptions that we might have to reflect the Canada that we live in.
What I love about India and people like her, curators and gallerists who kind of promote this kind of work, is that they're seeing the Canadianness of it all, and which I really appreciate it, because so often I unconsciously feel like I'm an outsider and I don't belong. People like India, especially India, like remind me constantly that no, you are part of history, you belong, you're Canadian, and this is just, maybe history hasn't been framed that way, but we can change it. And we should change it. It's really important to have allies on the inside who are pushing really hard to support people like me who are creating works that are not otherwise seen, but are Canadians making Canadian work, because it's the people on the ground who or working in these institutions who want to do this stuff, but they don't have the power. And it's really those at the top who are preventing different perspectives, different experiences of being Canadian from being centered.
My Still Life was placed in the center of Old Town Kitchen to highlight the role of Asian communities in BC and to reshape the narrative of a British Columbia without people of color. But then, without any explanation, the painting was suddenly removed. Some contextual panels were added, meant to spark critical thinking, but honestly, they came off a little shallow. So it makes you wonder, was the Royal BC Museum really serious about decolonization? For now, My Still Life remains tucked away in the museum's archives.
Do I feel annoyed that I have to be hyphenated all the time, like a Vietnamese Canadian? Can't I just be Canadian? But then I see it now. I clearly now see it as quite an advantage and a strength that shows my unique point of view. You know, I didn't realize that until, you know, I talked to my partner who's an artist, but he's like non-racialized Canadian and he never has that burden. He just makes whatever art he wants to, right? But for us, it's like we're representing our communities and we have that responsibility, and it has weight. So I thought, oh, what would it be like to not do that, right? And so I wanted to have that conversation for myself and to see, to bring it up to an audience, right? To show them kind of the different experiences that we have in everyday life and as artists.
If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe, and check out this playlist for more artist talks. Thanks for watching.